our votes have been stolen. There was obstruction. We have had a lot of problems with the military ballot watermark. Their numbers were almost identical to Cobb County, statistically almost impossible. I'm Debbie Fisher from Cobb County, and I, on November 16th, was a member of the voter review panel during the hand recount. And I'd like to talk to you about some things that I observed during that period of time that were greatly disturbing. During the review panel, I reviewed 298 military ballots on November 16th. One thing after I had seen several that I noticed was they were exceptionally clean. I was comparing them to the ballots that I had seen during the general election that didn't even come close to comparing to these ballots. What I found was there were bubbles on the ballots that were filled in perfectly. There was almost none that went outside the lines. There were no stray marks like we found on the ballots during the general election, such as X's or check marks. Not one ballot that I looked at had any kind of markings other than black. The circles were perfectly colored in. There were two blue ballots marked with blue. Thus, all of a sudden, it dawned on me that maybe these circles weren't filled in exactly as they should have been by hand. Maybe they were printed. So I challenged those ballots. At that period, I asked to speak to the elections director. I was told that the ballots cannot be marked by a machine because the military ballots in Cobb County had to be mailed. I later found out that just wasn't true. I found that out during the recount when I found a box that was marked military ballots, and I asked for the numbers on those ballots, to which I was given those. And it was funny because almost every single one of the ballots we received back were received electronically, thus proving that elections director, Janine, wasn't quite telling the truth. While I was looking through the ballots, I did a mental calculation on what I saw. And I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I have a fairly good calculator in my head. And I estimated somewhere between 80 and 90% of the ballots from the military were marked for Joe Biden. And when I started over and over going through these batches and seeing Biden, 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 even stacks of these ballots that were 100% Biden, the batch probably 3 were 100% Biden. I almost cried. Of all the votes, of all the people in this country, to have their votes disregarded or to fraudulently submit a ballot for the very men and women who fight to give us the right to vote, it made me physically sick to my stomach. Another thing I noticed on these ballots as I was going through, it was about halfway through the day when all of a sudden this ballot stood out with a watermark that was dark gray. It wasn't transparent. It wasn't even semi-transparent. It was solid gray, Uakava. I asked them to stop. I wanted to look at the entire ballot. It was solid gray. So I challenged that ballot. Janine Evler came over and she told me, oh no, these things are all printed on different printers. It's just that particular printer. Then I found 3 more that apparently were printed from that same printer. And I called it out again and I asked for these ballots to be investigated or thrown out. Because after you've looked at dozens and dozens of them, you know what a watermark looks like. However, she overruled me and told me to take it up with the Secretary of State, which I did. I filed a fraud report on those 3 ballots with the Secretary of State, And shamefully, all I received back from them was, "Thank you for filing your report." December 1st, when we were back to do the recount, on the military boxes that I saw, I noticed that they were fairly light in weight, and that's because of the number. So I actually did an open records request asking what the counts, individual counts, for the military ballots were. Now, mind you, I was told before, when I challenged it and asked for the tallies at the end of the day, we can't give you that. We don't actually tally the military votes separately. However, miraculously, under an open records request, I did get the numbers. Total requests were 2,298. Total returned, 1,826. Not returned, 470. Returned by deadline, 1,782, and then a handful returned after the deadline. 48 were rejected for one reason or another. 87 of those were challenged, and 4 had invalid signatures. The interesting thing during the recount, machine recount, was that there were only 1,401 ballots. What happened to the other 300 and change out of the 1826? How do we go from 1826 to 1401? There was no answer. During the process of calculating the 80 to 90%, when I was having a discussion with a fellow monitor, someone actually overheard my discussion. And this was an election worker. She later came up to me and she said, "I just want to tell you that we have had a lot of problems with the military ballot watermark." I had another person tell me, who did work the fraud line, that they had call after call where people could not print the ballot with the watermark. Why not? How could that happen? It's supposed to be embedded in that document. Those answers have yet to be given. As we went through this whole process, I will say that every time that there was a challenge, it was almost as if the supervisors at the election took it personally from the get-go. And I worked the general, I worked the hand recount, I worked the machine recount. People talk about obstruction, they talk about rudeness, they talk about whatever, but I can honestly tell you there was obstruction. The information we were given to get in the building wasn't even close to what we actually ended up having to do. When we got there, the proper paperwork wasn't available, so a lot of us were not let in when, in fact, the paperwork had been given. So as I'm waiting as a public observer versus a monitor, I decided to go into the room where they were doing signature verification. I was kicked out. So I went into the next room, which is where they were actually processing absentee ballots. And that is where the voter review panel was. I asked, why don't we have monitors in here? You aren't allowed to have a monitor in the voter review panel. And so I challenged that. Well, come to find out, I went back in there and I see 3 people walking around that look like, to me, they may be Democrats. So I asked the supervisor, are the Democrats allowed to have monitors, yet Republicans aren't? No, there's no Democrats in here. I said, well, who is that monitoring these tables? Oh, well, let me check. They came back, and all of a sudden, I was able to be a monitor in the voter review panel. When we came back the second day, we were told, no, that wasn't right. You cannot go in there and monitor. You can only stand as a public observer. At that point, I went and got Janine Evler. It was immediately cleared up. But things like that happened day after day after day, where they tried to obstruct us. And I never saw that happen with the Democrats. In closing, I would like to say that there are many laws that need to be changed on the entire election process. I won't go into my opinion about the voting machines themselves, but I do want to recommend to our legislators and all of the election registrars across the state of Georgia, I find it very, very important that we process new laws on how military ballots are processed. Right now, they're sent an electronic copy of a ballot. They print it out on an 8 by 11. Supposedly, they fill in the dots. Well, that's not necessarily true. There is a way to machine mark them. They print them out, sign them, scan them, and send them back electronically. There's a packet that they have to fill out to verify that they are who they say they are. Currently, I do not believe those items are being saved. I don't believe the emails are put in the archives for 24 months to make sure that those were actually military people voting. I do not believe that it is fair that they are doing the duplicates by election workers outside of the voter review panel. I've heard that testimony over and over again in other counties as well. Those should be done only, duplicates done only by voter review panels. The military in all of our counties should be separated out and a tally given. Out of the 159 counties, only one provided through the Secretary of State showed military ballots. And guess what? Their numbers were almost identical to Cobb County. I'm not saying that it isn't just a coincidence, but it's statistically almost impossible. I also believe that all electronic communication, whether it's the email sending the ballot, whether it's the envelope that they are supposed to fold, it's actually a piece of paper in the military, they fold it, they put a piece of tape on it, and they mail it. Those should be saved. Just like the security envelope on the absentee ballot should be saved. It is part of the ballot packet. And with that, I would just close and I would say that our votes have been stolen. And we keep hearing there was no fraud. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. I witnessed it myself.